There's no room to change anything about American society in 1887.
Get rid of the poorest and most worthless portion of our employees. It's all wrong that a people like the French should be allowed to control matters to so great an extent. They must give way to the German element, which, you know, is Anglo-Saxon and therefore has the right blend.
This is Behind the Baron, Andrew Carnegie.
I'm Max, and joining me today is my buddy Will, and we are here to continue our conversation about the life and times of Andrew Carnegie. Will, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well today. How are you, Max?
I'm good, man. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to continue our conversation. For those that missed us last time, we did a little pilot test run of this format not too long ago, and Will, why don't you remind folks where we left off last time?
So, when we left off last time, we were right at the start of the Civil War. The year was 1861. We talked about Andrew Carnegie's life. We talked about his childhood in Dunfermline, Scotland, his family immigrating to Pittsburgh. And then we talked about his involvement in the telegraph industry and then how at the outbreak of the Civil War, there was such a demand for telegraph operators that a young 23-year-old Andrew Carnegie found himself pretty much indispensable to the Union's war effort, at least through what became known as the First Battle of Bull Run, which was a Union loss. Carnegie was fighting for the Union. Well, not fighting, he was working for the Union as a telegraph operator.
Working for essentially the start of the military-industrial complex.
More or less.
Yeah.
The start of the modern telecommunications military complex.
Sure.
We left off right when Carnegie got a bit of a sunstroke, decided he didn't really like the heat of Washington, and he goes back to Pittsburgh. So that's where we left off, and we're going to pick up by talking about... That camera just did some really weird stuff.
Now, Will said before we started filming here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a couple on-air retractions.
We have a few on-air
corrections.
Things we fucked up. Yeah, we messed that up. Things we fucked up. We really stepped in stuff. We said it wrong. Now we're fessing up. Things we fucked up. Oops, our bad.
I want you all to know that you can trust everything I say now.
Yes, Will has done his research.
Okay, so the first thing that we need to talk about is about steam engines and when they do and don't explode. So,
it's a great topic of conversation.
We were talking about Andrew Carnegie's very first job where he was shoveling wood chips into a steam engine, and I said that this was a very dangerous job because steam engines in this era often exploded, and I cited an event in which a steamship exploded, killing certain members of the president's cabinet. Now, I got a couple things wrong here. So the actual story that I was referring to, in 1843, a steamship called the USS Princeton exploded during a pleasure cruise for dignitaries. It did not explode because of the steam engine, it exploded because of a gun malfunction. However, my point still stands that steam engines were very difficult at the time. I also claimed that only one member of cabinet was killed. 2 members of cabinet were killed when this gun exploded, the Secretary of the State and the Secretary of Navy. So that's just a little unrelated bit of 1840s U.S. history for you.
But so it wasn't on an actual naval battle or expedition. It was literally just a pleasure cruise for wealthy people and dignitaries and stuff?
For members of the U.S. government, for members of the D.C. elite.
They weren't going to Little St. James or anything, were they?
Not as far as we know, although there's like 1 million pages of documents released, so maybe they were. So that was the first thing. Steam engines, I stand by my point that steam engines were dangerous, but the USS Princeton is not evidence of that. And now you know a little more about the USS Princeton. The other thing, well, not the other thing, there's 4 things we're talking about. You asked me what damask cloth was. Damask being the cloth that Andrew Carnegie's father, William Carnegie, made his living weaving. Also what most of the townspeople in Andrew Carnegie's hometown did. I did not know what damask is. All it is a patterned fabric. So it's finely woven fabric that has patterns woven into the actual material itself.
Just an interesting, like, handcrafted, hand-woven fabric.
Yes, primarily used for tablecloths and curtains and other fancy
like decorative
drapery
kinds of things. Okay.
They were not mass-producing really cheap cloth for the making of clothes.
They weren't making
luxury.
jackets and stuff. They were making trim and luxury textiles, as it were.
And that's part of the reason why Dunfermline, the village Carnegie grew up in, was kind of one of the few last holdouts of the home economy because it was making this very, very specialized fabric. Although eventually, as we talked about, it did get automated, and a lot of the people in that town lost their job. And that's part of the reason why Carnegie's family had to immigrate. Point the third.
Okay. Third retraction?
Third, not retract, well...
Third edit?
Third edit. So
Okay.
we were talking about Scottish history, and I was kind of just running my mouth about Scottish history, which I really don't know much about. And I made a claim, which is that the process of union between Scotland and England to form the country of Great Britain was a long and drawn-out process that no one could possibly put a date on.
Okay.
So you actually can. It's 1707.
Okay.
A piece of legislation was passed by the English and the Scottish Parliament called the Act of Union. So that is the date that the nation of Great Britain came into existence.
1707.
1707.
Okay.
So about 120 years, 130 years
That's
before
when the
Carnegie.
Empire of England became Great Britain, essentially.
Yes.
Okay.
But the point that I was making, which is that Scottish and English unification was a drawn-out process, I do still stand by that, and I will refer to what I was specifically thinking of when I said this. So for those of you who don't know much about English royal history, which I didn't until recently, so 100 years before England and Scotland were formally unified, there was an event called the Union of the Crowns, in which England had no apparent heir to the English throne in the start of the 1600s, and what they did was they just took the Scottish king, James VI, and they just made him the King of England as well. So this is, from what I can tell, more or less analogous to like how Canada and the UK technically have the same monarch, but they're not the same country.
Right.
England and Scotland were still separate. They just so happened to have a king who was the exact same person.
Sure. So it's almost the first step on the way to what would later become the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Eventually. Yeah.
Yes. So that's
Okay.
my defense. Sorry, Scotland. Sorry, England. I don't know much about your history. I was running my mouth a little bit.
Well, we appreciate your honesty and your integrity with your research.
That's how you know you can trust everything.
Yeah, that's
I'm
how you know
about
you
to
can
say.
trust what we're about to run our mouths about again for another 90 minutes.
We own it all. Things we fucked up. Roll the recall.
The last thing I want to say, this is not a retraction, this is merely an expansion. When we got to talking about the Civil War, we were talking about what caused the Civil War, and I alluded to a quote by Alexander Stevens where he justifies what secession was all about. And I would like to read the quote in full because I do think it is an important quote
Yeah,
to
please do.
understand. So Alexander Stevens was so-called vice president of the so-called Confederacy.
Sure. An illegitimate state.
So I'm claiming.
Yes. I would agree. I don't even know. I didn't know this until super recently, but according to military historians, it's not even called the Civil War. It's called the War of the Rebellion.
Really, I didn't know that.
Calling it the Civil War or the war between the states and things of that effect are actually kind of a byproduct of like the sons and daughters of the Confederacy and a bunch of like nefarious meddling with the history that we tell ourselves. But yeah, officially it's referred to as the War of the Rebellion.
That's actually really interesting. I'm
Yeah.
only going to call it now. Now
Yeah,
that I know
right.
that the word Civil War is neo-Confederate propaganda. Alexander Stevens, vice president, so-called vice president, is giving a speech and he's talking about the Constitution of the United States and how it was fundamentally wrong on the idea that there was equality between all people. This is what he says, quote, "Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the I'm not going to say that word, is not equal to the white man. That slavery, subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth." So that was what
my
I was referring
goodness.
to. So he does just go out and say it. So
Yeah,
that
there-
is what the secession was about. It
There's
was
no
about-
beating around the bush. That's what's so funny to me about, you talk about daughters of the Confederacy and neo, Confederates and stuff like that. It's amazing how blatant they were back then and how much they've tried to backtrack that since. I mean, they were so brazen in what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, on that note, with those corrections corrected, and with all of you firmly trusting every word that comes out of our mouths, let us resume our conversation in the year 1861, when Andrew Carnegie decides that Washington, D.C. was a little too hot for him. There was a bit of a reshuffling happening in the Union Army. George McClellan was taking over general command of the Union Army from Winfield Scott, who was a Mexican-American war general, so very old guy. They gently push him out, bring a new guy in. During the shuffling, Carnegie asks if he can go back home to Pittsburgh, and he is allowed to do so. And now, because his boss, Tom Scott, he stays in D.C., so Carnegie gets his boss's old job. So now Carnegie is superintendent of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Oh, wow.
And so he has a very important job. He will keep that job until the end of the war. So he views it very much as his patriotic duty. Like, since he can't be in D.C., this is his home front job working in American industry.
This is how he can, like, contribute to the war effort without having to actually go and be on the front lines of the battlefield kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
And one of the very first thing he does on the home front is he leaves the United States of America and he goes back to Scotland. And so let's talk a little bit about what it was like for young Andrew Carnegie to return to his homeland with his mom.
Did he return because the war had started, or was it just kind of unrelated, just happened to coincide at the same time? Do we know that?
It might be mostly unrelated. I'm not really sure. I think it might have just been time to go back home. I don't know. His mom wanted to go back
family
home.
Or yeah, okay.
Yeah. So when he gets back to Scotland, Carnegie finds himself a bit out of touch with the town that he grew up in. And one of the things that he doesn't really understand is that all the people who have, for a generation or more, been making their living weaving cloth by hand, they're really against the big weaving factory coming into town. This is from Joseph Wall's biography. By the way, anytime I quote something, it's from this book, Joseph Wall's biography. So just default assume that's what I'm reading
book
from.
too. Holy, I don't know if
It's
people can
huge.
see that. How many pages is that?
It's a big boy.
It's a dense book.
It's like 1,000 pages plus
Wow.
bibliography. So yeah, it's
Well, if
thick.
you're interested in anything to do with Andrew Carnegie, I would maybe check that out.
Joseph Frazier Wall's biography, yes, from CLP, Maine, the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh.
Wow, full circle moment.
This copy has notes in it from somebody from very long ago. Don't write in library books.
Yeah, that's not. It
Inconsiderate.
is frowned upon.
Anyways, quote, Carnegie could no longer understand why they should fight industry. They should capture and control it, as he fully intended to do. I love that. He gets back home, everyone's against the factory. He's like, guys, just own the factory.
That's really interesting. So they're threatened by their way of life being replaced by automation. He comes back and he's like, well, why don't you just adapt to almost why don't? It's kind of like those, like sometimes you'll hear politicians say something to the effect of like, why don't coal miners just go and learn how to code
just learn
computers?
Python. Just
Learn
learn
Python.
AI. Learn AI.
It's like a very similar kind of thing of like, well, why don't you just go start a factory, guys?
My
It's a
personal
little
mantra,
easier said than done.
Yeah, my personal mantra is stay one step ahead of the times. Never
Yeah.
let the times catch up to you. If there's a factory, you own the factory. And if someone else wants to own the factory, you fight them. You do what needs to be done.
Maybe even call private militias in to stop their attempt to try to own the factory.
Indeed. Yeah. You bring up a really good point, which is that I should establish the framing device for this current episode. So, if all goes well, the episode that you're listening to, we're going to be covering Andrew Carnegie's life from the time he returns to Pittsburgh from the Civil War, 1861, up to 1892, which is the year that the Homestead riots take place. So if you're at all familiar with industrial history or Pittsburgh history, you probably know about the Homestead riots.
We got to plug our video. It'll pop up on screen somewhere.
Right there,
Yeah.
right there. We will get to that at the end, but just know that everything that you're about to learn, try to put what you're learning in that context, that this is all going to build up to a very public, very calamitous eruption of violence between workers and management at Carnegie's biggest steel plant. So everything is leading up to this. Or, you can think about it that way. Or not, or just do something else.
Just sit along for the ride and see where it goes anyway. Yeah.
So I got a question for you. Carnegie's in Scotland during the Civil War. If you just had to guess, how do you think people in Scotland felt about the Civil War? Who do you think they felt sympathy for?
That's a really interesting question. Like, I want to say the United States because
Right.
Scotland, they were kind of subjugated and made second class by the British Crown at many points. I could see them empathizing with the idea of liberty and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I can also see them thinking that the North is this tyrannical, imperial, industrial power that is kind of the same thing that they are facing in the British Isles.
More or less, both of those things are true.
Uh-huh.
One interesting angle I had not considered until I read the book I'm going to quote from the book. In Scotland, the hostility toward the Union cause was very real. So there were a lot of people who were very anti the Union. They were anti the North. There was, of course, an economic basis to this hostility. The unemployed cotton textile workers of Glasgow and Paisley could and did blame their hunger on the Union blockade. So, at the start of the Civil War, the Union used its superior navy to blockade southern ports and prevent cotton from being exported to the British Isles, with the intent that this would starve out the Confederate
cripple
economy.
the southern, yeah.
And that pretty much worked. But this had the effect of also starving the British, and in particular the Scottish cotton industry.
Wow.
So, just important to remember that these transoceanic economic ties are still very, very important in this era.
And, well, I think it also goes to show, too, how domestic policy, especially in a time of, like, great unrest like that, does really have foreign ripple effects, right? I mean, economies of scale kind of thing. Like, what happens at home eventually will impact the world at large. That was an unintended consequence of that naval blockade for sure.
Yeah. And one of the big fears, this is really separate to Carnegie's story, this is a tangent, but when the issue of foreign intervention in the American Civil War was considered, it was pretty much understood by everyone that if Britain intervened, it would be on the side of the South, because they produced the cotton exports that Britain needed so much for its empire. Now, of course, Britain never did intervene, because I think from reading other things about this, they were waiting for a decisive battle in the favor of the South, which never came.
Yeah.
So there was never any intervention, but it would have been on the side of the South.
That's really interesting. I never knew that.
One individual who did support the Union, who did support Carnegie's side in this war, was his uncle, who he convinced to buy a number of Union or federal gold bonds.
Really?
Which apparently made back 2-to-1 on his investment. So Carnegie convinced his uncle to buy Union bonds, and his uncle, like, low-key got a little bit rich off of that.
Wow.
So that was his tour in Scotland. He returns later in 1861, and he really hits the ground running. So business in Pittsburgh is booming. You got the iron industry manufacturing things, parts for trains, railroads, weapons. You got oil, which is about to be discovered up near Oil City, Pennsylvania.
And that's why they, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's why the Pittsburgh Stock Exchange opened, originally just to trade oil futures and stuff during the Civil War.
I haven't heard that before.
We can fact check that, but I think that
fact check that yourself, matter of fact. Go educate yourself. So, oil was discovered in Oil Creek, near what is now
it's a very
Oil City,
name.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And Carnegie gets involved in this. He's very much in tune to what is emerging in the regional economy. He is not limiting himself. Reminder, he still has a full-time job at the Pennsylvania Railroad. He's doing all of this just like, I don't know, during his breaks at work.
That's what I was about to ask. Like, he
weekends.
still has a job.
He still has a full-time job. He's making a salary.
Okay.
But increasingly, this job would become more of an irritation to him, and the salary would become a less and less important part.
It becomes an obstacle to his side hustles, essentially.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So he invests in a business called the Columbia Oil Company, which makes pretty solid returns. However, he would eventually get entangled in another oil venture that would really not work. Oil business is very, very hit or miss. You might have a huge mine where you'll make 10-to-1 on your investment. Or
I think technically I don't think they mine oil.
Oh, did I say the word mine?
No,
whatever it
what
is
you
they
mean,
do.
yeah.
Dig or whatever, drill. This is from the biography.
Extract, we'll go with that, yeah.
Carnegie, to be sure, would give to oil the credit for providing him with his first substantial start in business. So this is really the first thing he invests in. But he was never able to have any regret for leaving a business that he regarded as being too highly speculative for his taste. He strongly advised his closest friends to do the same. The considerable respect with which Carnegie would later regard John D. Rockefeller was due to the admiration Carnegie could feel toward a man who had brought order out of a business that he himself had found to be so chaotic as to be beyond remedy.
Oh, wow.
So he steps out of oil because he just could not take the heat.
He thinks there's no future in oil. It's too volatile. It's too risky, whatever.
So instead, he starts investing in a number of other ventures. So one business that he gets involved in, which would prove to be very influential, is the bridge-making business. So he invests in a business called Piper and Schiffler Bridge Company, and those are the names of the two engineers.
No, I imagine, not to cut you off, but is this mostly railroad bridges?
Railroad bridges,
okay.
yes. They're making iron railroad bridges because at the time, most railroad bridges were made of timber or stone, which were very, very primitive. We were talking in the last episode about how they were always dealing with just trains derailing and things just exploding.
That's so
because
incredible.
the bridges were made of wood.
I can't imagine, because you also, these train cars are filled up with coal and coke and scrap iron and whatever. Like, they're heavy, and there's God knows how many cars attached to one another. I can't imagine timber freight trusses like that. That's incredible.
Thank you for vamping to give me time to find this quote. So to talk about, I just found this quote really interesting to talk about why Carnegie found bridge making to be so important. For Carnegie, the tribute would take in many forms. Profit on iron for the beams, plates and posts, which...
Well, so was he making metals at this point?
He's also getting involved in metals simultaneously.
Okay.
The bridge contracts themselves, shares in the railroad companies that would use the bridges, and finally, commission on selling the bonds of these railroad companies to the financial centers of Europe and America. So bridges to him are going to be the intersection of many things.
So he's already working on the railroad as his 9 to 5, essentially. Mm-hmm. He's trying to make metal on the side, and then he figures, if I get into bridges, that kind of helps both of my interests, because railroads need them, and they need metals to make them.
Yeah, he's basically just all-purpose businessman, getting himself involved in as many different things as possible that he's eventually going to draw together.
Yeah, just trying to like vertically integrate his own career. Well, if I'm involved in this, that'll help that, and that'll help. That's really fascinating.
So that's why bridges were so important. I'm going to continue the quote. A vast, intricate web of finance, manufacturing, and transportation hung on these bridge strands. And across the network, Carnegie would move with amazing alacrity, always ready to rush in any direction where something of value had been caught in the fibers of the web. Another business that he got involved in was the Woodruff sleeping car business. So as trains are getting more and more long distance, it becomes very necessary to have comfortable sleeping cars. So he invests in a business developed by an engineer named Woodruff, where they're making sleeping cars. Now, do you happen to know off the top of your head any businessmen who are famous for creating sleeping cars?
I don't think I've ever been asked that question before.
Have you ever heard of George Pullman?
Yeah, George Pullman, sure.
So he invented a rival company.
Pullman, Illinois, right? Like he that's like.
Is that the name of a town in Illinois?
It's folks at home might know what I'm talking about, but it's in the south side of Chicago. It's basically what was a company steel town that is kind of mostly abandoned and kind of disinvested. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, George Pullman he basically ended up capturing the market for sleeping cars. But Carnegie was involved in another venture. We'll get into a little bit how he actually did become involved with Pullman's venture later. At this point, he has not yet met Pullman. He's involved with a separate sleeping car business.
Okay.
Also, a little fun fact I learned recently from a very trustworthy source in Italy. In Italy, it's not uncommon for people to call a bus il pullman.
No way.
They just call it a Pullman. Yeah.
Are you serious? Il Pullman.
So my source tells me.
That's awesome.
So Carnegie is involved in oil, he's involved in bridge making, he's involved in sleeping car companies, he's got a 9 to 5, the Civil War is happening, and then he decides to get involved with an old friend of his from back in, an old neighbor of his from the north side, named Thomas Miller. Now you know this fellow.
I've heard of Thomas Miller.
From the video we made.
Yeah.
So in 1861, again, we haven't gotten past 1861.
Yeah, this is all like 1 year. This is like...
More or less.
Yeah.
They form a business called the Freedom Iron Company.
Okay.
So Carnegie already
Very
has some
patriotic during the war.
Exactly.
I respect that.
And soon enough, in the year 1863, Andrew Carnegie would be brought in to help manage another iron business, thanks to his friend Thomas Miller. And this would be the Cloman Iron Company. So
Sure. This is where the story becomes a little familiar to me, at least. Maybe you, if you've seen the video about Andrew Cloman, which is such an interesting story. I definitely recommend that you go check that out.
you should watch that video, but only after you listen to the rest of this podcast.
Give me one moment. I'm gonna just, I don't know what, sorry.
Carnegie gets back from the war. He's invested in all these industries. 1863, he gets brought in to help manage a dispute that's happening between Thomas Miller, his business partner, and this other iron business that Thomas Miller has been invested in. Now, to Carnegie, this whole business is like just a sideshow, right? His friend Thomas Miller is like, hey, I'm like fighting with these guys. I need you to come and redraw a new business contract.
Can you do me a favor?
Can you do me a favor?
Okay. Yeah.
This would end up being probably the single most important investment he would ever make. It is from this seed, this iron business, that his whole steel empire would grow, more
And
or less.
if I can find it, we'll flash that up on screen. That I actually found in a book from sometime in the 1900s. But it says under a picture of Andrew Cloman that it was out of his tiny iron forge that Carnegie's empire was born. Yeah.
So, in the video that we made about Andrew Cloman and his relationship, oh, goodness me.
So if you've seen our video about Andrew Cloman, you might know a little bit about this story. But Will, you said that we had a line in that video that you weren't super happy with. What was that?
The line was, there was a complicated falling out between members in Cloman's iron business, which demanded Carnegie get involved.
Okay.
So now we're going to talk about that complicated falling out. We're going
Cool.
to talk
Okay.
beat by beat what happened. Okay. You got the Cloman brothers, Andrew Cloman and Anthony Cloman. They are iron workers. They immigrate from the city of Treves, Prussia. I think that city goes by a different name now because I can't find it on Google. They immigrate in the 1850s to what's now Millvale, Pennsylvania, and they set up an iron shop where they buy up scrap iron and they forge it into railroad axles. They gain quite a reputation around the city for making good railroad axles. Andrew Cloman is very stern, very serious, very closed off. Anthony is very outgoing. Now, I think we imply in the video, or I'm sorry, I implied in the script that I wrote for the video that Anthony was the person who eventually got Thomas Miller to invest in their business. I actually am not sure if that's true. I made that assumption
Okay.
because he was the more social of the two.
Sure. May not
That
be
fact
true.
is probably lost to history.
Okay.
In any case, these two brothers who are running their iron business find help in Thomas Miller, who is just a local businessman, and they say, Thomas, can we have some money so that we can buy a second trip hammer? I don't really know what a trip hammer is, but it's an important tool you would want.
I think
Do you know?
a trip hammer, I think it's kind of like a, not like a hydraulic press, but like a pneumatic hammer, like that kind of goes
Just a
like
big old...
to like
yeah.
flatten out iron, yeah.
I've seen like live leak videos of giant trip hammers in steel factories,
Yeah.
like exploding and stuff. Yeah. Okay.
That kind of thing, yeah.
So Thomas Miller invests in their business in a kind of informal way and buys them the second trip hammer. Andrew Cloman, he's a little suspicious, and he says that he wants another guy to get involved. He wants an additional party in the business and to formally incorporate everything. So Thomas Miller says, hey, I got this friend named Andrew Carnegie who he would be happy to invest in this business. And Andrew Cloman says, absolutely not. We are not letting Andrew Carnegie into our business. The
Do we know
reason
why?
for that being, yes.
Okay.
Carnegie was already much too imposing a business figure in Pittsburgh in 1863, and Cloman knew too much of his aggressive business tactics to want him as a partner, even if Carnegie would have consented to associate himself with such a small firm.
So he had a bad feeling about this guy.
Yeah,
right
he was
off the
like, we're
bat.
not letting that guy into our business.
That guy's too ambitious,
too hard-headed.
Yeah,
he's
something
going to ruin
about him.
everything.
Okay, wow.
So instead, Thomas Miller says, I know this guy, childhood friend of mine from back in the day named Henry Phipps Jr. He's a great bookkeeper, quiet guy, super timid, won't cause any problems. So Cloman is happy with that. Something that feels legally dubious is happening where Phipps is, in writing, in charge of all of Thomas Miller's shares in the company. Thomas Miller does not have any legal ownership of any part of the business. Henry Phipps does, but Henry Phipps super pinky promises that he will let Thomas Miller treat those assets like his own. So Phipps is part owner in the Cloman business, and he's also their bookkeeper. Things are going all right until Thomas Miller starts selling some of his Phipps shares behind everyone's back.
Without telling Phipps himself.
Without telling Phipps, but of course Phipps didn't really care, right?
Yeah.
He was just a bookkeeper. Andrew Cloman got really upset. Then Andrew Cloman starts getting really mad at his brother, Anthony, who starts really slacking off, not pulling his weight in the business. So he goes to Thomas Miller, the guy who he's already a little not so trusting in, and he says, can you buy out my brother's shares? And then Anthony sells his shares and just leaves. Completely leaves the business.
So that's what happened to Anthony. He just kind of...
Yeah, he dipped
buzzed
out of there.
off.
He was like, my hard-o brother is putting me to work. I just want to hang out all day.
Yeah.
So Anthony's out of the picture. But now Thomas Miller is effectively a majority owner of the company, which Andrew Kloman is not happy about, even though he did organize this particular purchase. So then, and this is where it gets real bad. This is where it gets messy. Now, Thomas Miller does actually legally own part of the Kloman's business. But Kloman doesn't want that. But he also doesn't really know how business works. So he takes out an ad in a local paper that says, Thomas Miller is not a member of our firm, nor has he any real authority to transact business on our account. So he basically,
Are you serious?
He vague posts on social media saying, Thomas Miller is not actually my business partner, even though that is not a legally binding way to remove someone from your company.
He literally
just, vague
posted on his Facebook wall, like, this guy's super fake, don't talk to him.
Don't at me. Like,
What?
Yeah, which is kind of petty and not very professional. A thing that isn't mentioned in this biography that I do want to bring up at this moment, at this very moment, there is a Confederate army heading toward Pennsylvania. Like, there's a very real possibility that General Lee will invade Pittsburgh, and there is significant fear that that will happen.
Oh, yeah.
So you gotta imagine everyone's just, like, really stressed out all the time. So this is the point at which Thomas Miller writes to Carnegie. He says, please, I'm begging you, like, this, I need you to come in and save me. Everyone consents to this happening, and a new business is incorporated on September 1st, 1863, 2 months after the Battle of Gettysburg. Andrew Carnegie writes up a new agreement between all the principal partners. The business is called Kloman and Phipps. It is an iron forge, and the capitalization is $60,000.
Wow.
And so it is from this that everything will begin to grow.
And that must have been a lot of money in 1863.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I think Carnegie's yearly salary, I don't have this in front of me at the moment, but I'm pretty sure his yearly salary from the Pennsylvania Railroad was something like $2,000.
Yeah.
So this is
So
a lot
$60,000.
of money.
I mean, it is that's their market cap, so it's not like they're
Yeah.
necessarily bringing in all that money, but that's a lot of money for the Civil War.
And I would
Sorry, the War of the Rebellion.
The War of the
Rebellion. Yeah.
I do want to talk briefly about why Andrew Kloman was so good at what he did.
Yeah,
So I'm quoting
please
from
do.
later in the book here. This ambition was aided immensely by the inventive and adaptive talents of Andrew Kloman, as Carnegie himself readily admitted. According to Carnegie, it was Kloman who was the first to introduce the cold saw that could cut cold iron into exact lengths, who invented upsetting machines to make bridge lengths, and who built the first universal mill in the United States.
This guy over here built an upsetting machine.
He built an
dude.
upsetting machine. No idea what
That's
that means.
super funny.
But if you know, like, 19th century ironworking,
Then you definitely know
That's
what
like
that is.
inventing the iPhone, basically.
Yeah, right. I mean, we implied very heavily, I mean, not even implied, we explicitly said in our video that he was the mechanical and metallurgical brains behind the iron making operation.
Yes, Carnegie called him a mechanical genius.
Yeah.
Now, this last one, I actually want to expand a little bit on what we talked about in the video. We talked about the universal mill and how he was able to reproduce this machine because a German worker in their factory. By the way, they have employees this whole time. There's like a bunch of people in the mill. It's not just Kloman by himself, like hammering away at whatever.
But it's also not a huge place until they incorporate with the other venture. It's not a huge operation.
It starts out very small.
Yeah.
A recently arrived German iron worker explains to Andrew Kloman how this machine works, and then he's able to build it. Something that I didn't really didn't realize until I reread this chapter of the book. The reason that they had this a number of German workers is because a bunch of the workers at the iron mill went on strike. And so they brought in German workers as strike breakers.
Really?
And then the German workers were like, did you hear about this thing they have in Europe?
No way.
So, Homestead, strike breakers.
Wow.
We're seeing the
so
patterns,
the seeds are
guys.
being planted. Yeah, that's incredible. So until that time, were the people employed in that mill just kind of locals that were maybe born here or from here, and then they could just be replaced with cheaper labor at a later date? Was kind of...
I suppose so, yeah. It was a Pittsburgh area crafts union called the Sons of Vulcan that went on strike.
Oh, wow.
So I assume this is just local Yinzer guys. I don't know.
Okay. Some Scotch-Irish folks or something.
Something like that, yeah. Let's pull back for a second.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of the Civil War. Lee is turned back at Gettysburg. Andrew Carnegie goes into this business and reorganizes it as Kloman and Phipps. The very next year, Andrew Carnegie gets drafted to fight in the Civil War.
Again,
Now,
this is his second time getting called to Washington? Well, he wasn't drafted.
He wasn't
the
drafted.
First time.
This is like drafted. You're gonna
Like, his
you're
number
gonna
got
die
picked.
kind of drafted.
Okay.
Yeah, his number got picked.
Yeah.
However, fortunately, them as probably now, you could buy your way out of the draft. So he pays a guy who, well, you could either pay a fee or you could find a replacement. And Carnegie pays a guy who his business is finding replacements.
No, so that's like a whole industry.
The whole
during the
industry
war?
is finding
Oh,
your
wow.
draft replacement. So the guy who
Holy cow.
replaces Carnegie in the Civil War was an Irish immigrant named John Lindu. Could not find much of a trace of him on the internet. Didn't do a super deep dive, but if you out there want to figure out what happened to John Lindu, would Carnegie have survived the Civil War? That could be interesting. So, not too long after this, the Civil War ends.
The War of the Rebellion.
The War of the Rebellion ends. General Grant chases General Lee into Virginia, takes Richmond. Lee surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse. This is the moment where Andrew Carnegie finally decides, thank God the war is over, I can quit my job. So he quits his 9-to-5, and I'm going to read what his final message as superintendent of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Like the final thing that he transmitted in Morse code through a telegraph kind of thing?
Yes, he's sending this note to all of the officers and employees in the division.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to read the whole thing. Gentlemen, I cannot allow my connection with you to cease without some expression of the deep regret felt at parting. 12 years of pleasant association have served to inspire feelings of personal regard for those who have so faithfully labored with me in the service of the company. The coming change is painful only as I reflect that in consequence thereof, I am not to be in the future, as in the past, intimately associated with you, who have become my personal friends. Thanking you most sincerely for your most zealous efforts made at all time to meet my wishes, I bid you farewell. What a nice boss.
That's such a crazy way to say I'll miss you. That's
Yeah.
so many words. It like read that. What was like the second line in that again? Just read that one line.
The coming change is painful only as I reflect that in consequence thereof I am not to be in the future, as in the past, intimately associated with you who have become my personal friends.
That how many prepositions are in that sentence? That is ridiculous.
Yeah.
He could have just said, "Oh, it sucks. I'm not going to see you guys anymore."
Now he used the word thereof.
He knew a lot of words that I don't use.
You're gonna have your work cut out for you in the edit.
Yeah, it's okay.
So 1865 is a big year for Carnegie. Quits his Civil War ends. Yippee. Sorry. The War of Rebellion ends.
Attaboy.
Yippee.
There you go.
Carnegie quits his day job. He reorganizes the Piper and Schiffler Bridge Company into the Keystone Bridge Company.
And he could
Make
afford to
things
do
happen.
that just kind of by like buying and selling bonds and oil futures and stuff during the war and just kind of investing the money he had at the time, or
Yeah, he takes his salary money, starts investing in things, and his money just keeps growing. And then he
Okay.
just moves money from one business, one interest to the next
Yeah.
when it needs to be moved.
sure,
And
buy
so he-
low, sell high kind of mindset.
More or less,
Yeah.
yeah. Also in 1865, he decides to go on a grand tour of Europe. So he leaves with Henry Phipps, the little bookkeeper, and you got to imagine, Henry Phipps was probably stressed out by the whole deal with Cloman, right? He was just trying to keep books and make some money. They ended up in this whole thing. So Carnegie was like, "All right, buddy, let's go on a little
So
little
he
vacation."
took him with him.
He took him with him.
That's so sweet.
Another little detail I learned about Phipps, which is, this is kind of endearing, especially if you live in the Pittsburgh area and you primarily know Phipps as the name of those botanical gardens.
Yeah.
Phipps was not actually a friend of Carnegie and Miller growing up. He was the younger brother of a friend of theirs who died.
Oh,
and so they
wow.
kind of just adopted the younger brother as like, okay, well, we'll keep in touch with you.
We'll like bring him
You're-
under our wing kind of
Yeah.
thing. That's awesome.
So Phipps was like the little brother who got to be invited to the big kid's birthday party.
Yeah.
He goes with Carnegie to Europe. Also, a gentleman named John Vandevort. Cannot really figure out much of who he is other than that he's just a businessman and a friend of Carnegie. So these three guys, they go on a grand tour of Europe. Countries such as France.
I've heard of that one.
France is a big one.
Yeah.
Carnegie actually speaks a little French, which is
Really?
kind of fun. Yeah, he's able to speak a little French, and then Vandevort speaks a little German. So they're able to get
So
by.
they're able to kind of get around Europe.
Yeah, he's a bit of an international man.
Wow.
Also, just having grown up in Europe, perhaps not continental Europe, but he maybe feels a little more comfortable navigating through these other cultures, which this will be one of his big advantages, that he's very good at going to Europe and securing money.
And he's still a very young man at this point, right? He's, what, in his 20s or something?
30.
He's about 30?
He's about 30, 31 now. So they're traveling through Europe. John Vandevort and Phipps go out to Switzerland, but Carnegie decides he's going to stay back in Paris. And he's not just staying back for fun. He's got a little business going on. There's this process called the Dodd process.
Okay.
And it is a patented process in which you can fuse steel onto iron rails. So Carnegie hears about this and he's like, steel on iron rails, that might be useful. So while he's in Europe, while everyone else is gallivanting in the mountains of Switzerland, Carnegie stays behind and he negotiates becoming the sole American patent holder for that patent. He also secures the patent for paper pipes. Pipes made of paper. I don't know. Pipes made of paper. That one definitely did not work out. Little hit or miss, right? He's just kind of like seeing what's up in Europe and just kind of like talking to these business guys, and he's like, I'm the best American businessman to be trusted with your patent. Then he goes to Prussia to go to explore the ironworks of Prussia and learn the state of the art in Prussia, because Germany at this point is probably second only to Great Britain in terms of industrial manufacturing. They're rallying their industrial manufacturing base pretty quickly. Just a little historical context, 1865, this is really like peak German unification. So Prussia, a German-speaking country, starts a war with Denmark. They pick up some, this is like Otto von Bismarck. He is in Prussia. They start a war with Denmark, pick up some territory, start a war with Austria, beat Austria pretty handily, pick up some territory. They're about to go to war in a few years with France, and then that's when you really get Germany. So we're in the midst of Germany's rise to the top of European great power conflict. He sees France, he sees Prussia, and this is his take on the difference between France and Germany. I have faith in the Germans and expect to live to see a united Germany under a government somewhat like England. It would be rather too much to wish for a perfect thing like a republic, taking the lead in continental affairs. It is all wrong that a people like the French should be allowed to control matters to so great an extent. He's anti-France for these reasons.
Oh.
In France, all seems dead. The soil is miserably farmed, and one is at a loss to account for the leading position with which the Gauls have attained. I am one of those who hold that they cannot maintain it long, that they must give way to the German element, which, you know, is Anglo-Saxon and therefore has the right blend. So you might be wondering right now, while Carnegie is gallivanting in Europe, who is managing the business at home?
I was wondering that.
Who do you think is managing the business at home?
Well, he's got a lot of business partners at this time, so I imagine he's relying pretty heavily on Andrew Cloman. Is Henry Phipps still with him in Europe?
Henry Phipps is out in Switzerland.
Okay.
So he's got his 22-year-old younger brother, Tom, managing everything.
Tom Carnegie.
Carnegie. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about Tom Carnegie.
Okay.
So Carnegie realizes that all of these letters he's writing home to his brother about, like, I went to the Arc de Triomphe and I went to the... He's realizing, like my 22-year-old brother probably also wants to be on the trip.
Yeah.
So he writes this to Tom Carnegie. You wonder if we ever do think of one who has notes to meet. Indeed, we often do, and the more I feel myself drinking in enjoyment, the deeper is my appreciation of your devoted self-denial, and the oftener I resolve that you shall have every opportunity to enjoy what I am doing now. So he's trying to be nice to his brother.
Yeah.
They have an interesting dynamic where Carnegie is the very brash, very hard-headed, big vision. Like, I want to build the biggest, oldest child, whereas Tom Carnegie is much more reserved.
Sure.
Tom was everything that Andrew was not. Cautious, where Andrew was impulsive. Skeptical of new ideas, which Andrew would enthusiastically embrace. Conservative in financial matters, where Andrew was, in his opinion, reckless. Tongue-tied and ill at ease in social gatherings, where Andrew was at his loquacious best. Wanting his own private family life completely separate from the business world, while Andrew could never separate the two and would play out his full life upon a well-lighted stage.
Wow. So Carnegie was much more of a ham. Mm-hmm. He was out there, he liked the attention, the spotlight. Tom was like, I'd rather just live a comfortable life, man. I just want to be fine.
Had there been no Andrew Carnegie, Tom Carnegie would undoubtedly have been a highly respected and prosperous Pittsburgh businessman, but there would have been no Carnegie Steel empire, no multi-million-dollar fortune, and the Carnegie name would have had meaning only in the local business history of western Pennsylvania. But what would have become of Andrew Carnegie in these early formative years of business building if there had not been a Tom Carnegie to get credit from local banks, to soothe wounded feelings of partners and employees, and to hold some kind of rein upon Andrew's imagination, was a question that the elder brother probably never asked even of himself.
Wow. So he was kind of keeping, the younger Carnegie was keeping the older one on the rails a little bit.
Yeah, they kind of both needed each other for a while.
Yeah, symbiotic.
Because Carnegie was always leading the charge, and he outlives his brother. We'll get there eventually. He gets the credit for it. But both of them were extremely instrumental in all of their early business dealings. So Carnegie returns from Europe. He's got all these great patents and all these great ideas. None of them work. The Dodd process, he makes these rails, sends them out to, he's selling them to the Pennsylvania Railroad. He's like, look, I got this patent, steel facing on the rails.
Everything. Yeah.
Sends them to the Pennsylvania, and then his old boss, Edgar Thompson, who was his boss's boss, really, big dog at the Pennsylvania. He sends him back, and he's like, Carnegie, this is great, but these are terrible. Like, I appreciate your go get it attitude, but like these are terrible.
Do we know what was wrong with them? They just weren't sturdy, or
the steel would peel off. They would not remain one fixed object.
Wow.
So it was not good. There was this other patent that he got called the Webb process for hardening cast iron. Also doesn't work.
Nobody can bat 1,000.
Nobody can bat 1,000.
Yeah.
Carnegie's swinging and he's missing a lot.
Yeah.
In 1867, a little change happens in Carnegie's life. So Tom Carnegie gets married. At this time, Andrew Carnegie had bought a house in Homewood. So that's where he's living full-time, out in Homewood. Far, far at the top of the hill, way away from the rivers, far from the smoke. Like, he's in the nice part of town.
Yeah, there's trees and there's clean air.
Yeah. You can hear birds and stuff. He gives Tom Carnegie his house, and then him and his mother move to New York. So this is going to like supercharge Carnegie's business abilities, because now he's still managing all this stuff in Pittsburgh, but he's able to broker a lot more deals with big money in New York. So the next big project that Carnegie gets involved in that we're going to talk about is an interest of the Keystone Bridge Company. So Carnegie is very involved with this bridge company. They're building iron rail bridges. His old boss, Tom Scott, after the Civil War, gets very involved in Keystone. So him and Tom Scott are working together on this company. And the big catch for any bridge company, the big thing that you want to get, is a contract to build whatever bridge they're going to put over the Mississippi River. So,
because that's the key to the West.
That's the key to the West. And also just publicity. First bridge over the Mississippi. So pretty much right after the Civil War, the government starts trying to figure out where to put a bridge. Carnegie's main role in this is going to be making Keystone the supplier of iron for the bridge. Or rather, Keystone is going to be the main contractor for the bridge. He will help supply the iron to the bridge, and he will help sell bonds to European businessmen to finance the bridge.
Wow.
So I just want to take a moment to talk just a little bit of shit on the History Channel.
Yeah.
So
I always support that.
So there is a History Channel documentary about Andrew Carnegie, and I watched it. It's okay. They have this moment where Tom Scott and Carnegie are looking across the vast banks of the Mississippi. You know, they're like, we're going to put a bridge there. And Tom Scott is like, no one's ever going to put a bridge there. It's not going to work. And then Carnegie goes, what if we used steel?
I bet that's just how the conversation went.
That is quite literally the opposite of what happened. So at this time, Carnegie does not think steel is a good idea.
Yeah.
So here's a quote that
it's his only experience with it at this point, trying to mate it with an iron rail and failing to do so. Yeah.
Also, at this point, steel is not a structural material. It is like springs and like knives, like really small, like precise.
More of like
things.
a finishing that's for
wire, tiny things. So he has this patent, doesn't work. So he's writing this to Tom Scott because Tom Scott wants to invest in this new steel process. And Carnegie says, my advice, which don't cost anything if of no value, would be to have nothing to do with this or any other great change in the manufacture of steel or iron. I know at least 6 inventors who have the secret. All are so anxiously awaiting. That there is to be a great change in the manufacture of iron and steel some of these years is probable, but exactly what form it is to take no one knows. I would advise you to steer clear of the whole thing. One will win, but many lose, and you and I, not being practical men, would very likely be among the more numerous class.
So they're almost it's almost like the .com bubble or something. It's like, hey, we don't know which one of these is going to take off. I would just stay out of it completely.
Exactly.
Wow.
He would end up completely contradicting himself there.
Yeah.
As
we
all
will soon find out. Yeah.
Just another piece of evidence that the History Channel got this completely wrong and was massively oversimplifying the narrative to make broadcast television. So the lead engineer on the St. Louis Bridge is this fellow named James Eads, and there's certain parts of the bridge that Eads is insisting that they use steel for. So from the book, it says, major bolts on the piers and the staves that would make up the tubes to support the superstructure. If you're a bridge engineer, that means a lot to you. Carnegie had made sure that his own company, Carnegie, Kloman and Company, got the contract for all of the ironwork on the bridge, and Eads' subsequent refusal to accept iron throughout the construction was particularly galling to Carnegie. So the engineer is like, I need steel for these, and then Carnegie says, here's some iron for those, and he says, no, I'm not using
I
them.
asked you for something.
I asked you for steel. So quite literally, it is the opposite. Carnegie is like, no, you want to use iron for this.
We can make so much of it, and I own the company.
And I own the company.
Yeah.
A thing that I forgot to mention, which happened in 1865, the Kloman and Phipps mill gets reorganized into a new business called the Union Iron Mills. Mm-hmm. That's all. Eventually, the bridge does get built. He makes a trip to Europe in 1872 to sell bonds to big bankers in London, including Junius S. Morgan, the father of something Pierpont Morgan, J.S. Morgan. It's not they're not both Junius, but one is J.S. Morgan and his son is J.P. Morgan.
Yeah.
And there's a really great passage from the biography that describes what these business dealings are like. More fascinating than any game of chess were the delicate and cautious gambits with which these financiers would open the negotiations. So courtly, so unhurried, so apparently casual, yet always so clever. They won Carnegie's admirations even while he was plotting his counter moves. How easy it all was, once the terms had been agreed to. A few simple figures on a slip of paper, a warm handshake, perhaps a glass of sherry and a few words of small talk. And that was all it took to move into the market the necessary gold to heat the foundries in Pittsburgh and put iron beams across a muddy river 5,000 miles away. Here was capitalism in its most powerful form, and Carnegie would never tire of watching its quiet, smooth operation. This is also a good point to remind us all that American industry is very much dependent on European money.
Yeah. Like we said,
the economy is already global at this era. Reminding us all that everything is in the context of Homestead. So in 1874, the bridge opens, but Carnegie decides to be a little tricky. So the Keystone Bridge Company had the contract to build the roadway on the top of the bridge. And on the day that had been announced in the papers that the bridge will open this day, all the people, the good folk of St. Louis, go to walk across the Mississippi, and they find the workers of the Keystone Bridge Company, they're blocking the way. But this was not a labor strike. This was something Carnegie specifically directed his workers to do.
Really?
So Carnegie is using organized labor to his benefit. The reason he was doing this is because Keystone hadn't fully gotten paid yet, and he really did not want to get shorted on this. He did not want to get stiffed. So he told his workers, prevent anyone from going on the roadway, and then tear up the roadway that you just made until we get paid.
Wow.
So I bring this up because it made me realize the power of organized labor, it had been used by management before. The fact that you can rally your workers and get your way, just kind of break the rules to get your way, Carnegie had already done that.
Yeah.
So we're already in a business environment where workers are very accustomed to just being used as like goons for their boss.
Yeah, right.
So keep that in mind as we get toward a major conflict between management and labor. There's already a well-established practice, maybe not well-established, but there already is a practice of using your workers to get what you want.
Yeah, there's an established precedent of that for sure.
So it's really only a small jump from there for your workers to fight for what your workers want.
Sure.
Also on this trip that Carnegie made to get bonds for the bridge, he gets to watch a Bessemer converter in action. And this might be the moment where Carnegie really internalizes how important steel might be. The Bessemer converter was a means of turning pig iron into steel. I don't really know how it works, I'm going to be honest. but it's a really great way to make steel. It was invented by an English engineer, Henry Bessemer, in 1850. This was not, Carnegie had already experimented with a little bit of Bessemer work in his factories already. So in 1868, the Freedom Iron and Steel Company, which is his other iron company, completely separate from the Clomid industry, it was producing
So he has the Union Company and the Freedom Company, and these are two completely different things.
Completely separate, only connection is that he's involved in both.
And they both make metals?
Yes, they both make iron.
Wow.
Freedom Iron and Steel was already producing Bessemer steel in limited quantities by 1868. So he was familiar with this process, but I think on his 1872 trip, this is when he realizes this is something that can be manufactured at scale. The primary limitation to bringing over the Bessemer process to America is that the Bessemer converter only worked if your iron ore had low phosphorus content. And it just so happened that when Henry Bessemer developed his process, he was using very low phosphorus iron mined in Wales. So it was thought that if you want to use this really, really useful process for making steel, you need to buy your iron from Great Britain. So that was the main limitation. But what changed was the discovery of a large amount of low phosphorus iron ore in Michigan. And it's at this moment that I would just like us all to take a step back and recognize that about 100 years before this, Michigan was France.
Oh, yeah.
Michigan was
Fort
France.
Detroit.
Fort Detroit.
Yeah.
And then George Washington killed a bunch of French people in the woods, which led to a
right
global
around
calamity,
here. Yeah.
which led to Michigan becoming Britain, which precipitated a revolution that George Washington won, and then the creation of a new nation, which would then have access to this iron ore to create a steel manufacturing base to become the dominant naval power in the 20th century. 1872, Carnegie comes back from his trip in Europe, having warm glasses of sherry with Junius Morgan, and he decides, I'm going to build the biggest Bessemer steel plant in America.
Because now we can source it from Michigan. All right.
Now, it should be noted, he is not at all early to this. There are many other steel companies using the Bessemer process to great effect. The thing that he's going to have an advantage in is that he's got personal contacts in the rail industry, he's got personal contacts in the bridge industry, personal contacts in the iron industry, and also personal financial stake in every related industry. After many years of not being at all interested in steel, he's got to convince all of his partners that, no. I actually changed my mind. Like, I've take back everything I said.
Full 180 on the steel
We need to put everything into steel right now. Tom Carnegie, Phipps, and Clomid were iron men, and they regarded the intrusion of steel into their domain with as much friendliness as cattlemen in the West greeted the sheep ranchers. They raised all of the old doubts about steel, the tremendous cost, the difficulty of obtaining ore, the long, slow process of educating their customers to accept a much more expensive product. With customary impatience, Carnegie brushed all of these objections aside.
So nobody was into the idea.
Nobody was into the idea at first.
Yeah.
On November 5th, 1872, with a capitalization of $700,000.
In 1872.
1872. $700,000. Carnegie incorporates a business called Carnegie McCandless & Co. McCandless was just another businessman who was willing to take the plunge on steel. They begin constructing a massive state-of-the-art steel mill on the Monongahela River roughly at the site of General Braddock's defeat during the French and Indian War. Even though there are already steel plants in the area, a principle of the steel industry at this time is a new steel mill will always be able to outcompete older ones, just because you can incorporate new technology.
That fast.
Yeah.
Wow.
This plant, which he names the Edgar Thomson plant after his old boss's boss at the Pennsylvania Railroad. He asks Edgar Thomson, hey, can I name a steel plant after you? Thomson is like, you can name it after me, but I'm not investing, right? I'm not liable for this, right? And Carnegie's like, no. It's just in your honor. In your honor. But really, what he wants is a good relationship, because the Pennsylvania Railroad is going to be both a customer of their product, which are going to be steel rails. Carnegie is making steel rails for the railroad.
But I imagine they're going to be a customer, but also they're going to be crucial for bringing ore and coke and fuel and whatever else to all the individual plants and facilities and all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because Carnegie started out in the rail business, he had a tremendous amount of respect for how important the rail industry was. So he really just named the plant Edgar Thomson to get in Edgar Thompson's good graces.
Yeah. Well, he's a schmoozer.
He's a schmoozer. He knows how the game works.
Yeah.
To run this new mill, Andrew Cloman is not at all qualified. So he goes over to Johnstown, and he finds a fella named Captain Bill Jones, who was a captain from the Civil War, and he says, would you like to be the superintendent for my brand new shiny mill out in Braddock? 1873. Mill opens, they start cranking out rails. There's a massive financial recession in America.
Oh.
So all that good, bubbly post-war optimism crashes.
So the bubble burst.
The bubble burst.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what specific business choices made Carnegie better than all of his peers.
Okay.
So the
Because I
first-
imagine, there's probably a lot of people that never recovered from that financial backslide, right?
Exactly. One of the things is that he did not like giving out profits as dividends. So he did not like the idea of having a large group of shareholders buying your stock, just to play the market. So he has a very limited circle of investors, people who typically he personally knows and can personally assure the loyalty of, who aren't going to just sell it in the middle of a panic. Related to that, he doesn't like giving his investors or other people, important executives at his business, he doesn't like giving them salaries. Captain Bill Jones is one of the few people who gets a salary because he knows that he's kind of the only guy who can do this job. Everyone else, Carnegie's rationale is, you're in this for the business. If I'm paying you a salary, you're only in it for the salary. When he does get profits, he typically spends it on new equipment for his plants, expanding plant facilities, and decreasing costs.
So he's an infrastructure and efficiency kind of guy.
Yeah, he's infrastructure, efficiency, and growth.
Yeah.
And this is very different from a lot of the modern corporate philosophy. So I'm a little bit running my mouth here, and I might get a fact or two wrong.
Okay.
But
We'll do another edit.
we'll do another edit in part 3, because this is only getting us to Homestead.
Yeah.
We still have another 30 years after this.
This guy lived an eventful life, I'll
Yeah.
tell you that much.
You must be doing something really interesting right now, like cleaning your bathroom if you're still listening.
Yeah.
Because we're getting into it.
Yeah.
A lot of modern corporations, the philosophy is that their product is their shares. The thing that makes them valuable is their shares, and the shares always have to go up.
The point of a corporation is to drive shareholder profits.
Yes.
Is kind of
That's a very modern thing, mostly coming about in the 70s and 80s because
I was
of
going to say, is that a
gentleman
Reagan Revolution kind of thing? Or
in that era,
Yeah.
the guy who was mostly responsible for it is named Jack Welch.
Oh,
He was
okay,
the
sure.
CEO of General Electric.
Yeah.
Now, General Electric as a unified company no longer exists, and it's kind of his fault, but he took GE to the frickin' moon. Huge returns for all the investors, but it really hollowed out the company, and by now GE has basically been sold for parts.
Yeah.
So this is
You can watch 30 Rock if you want to get that story. Yeah.
They talk about that at 30
Yeah.
Rock. But yeah, that's the modern corporate ethos. Carnegie was not doing that at all. The value of his business is the value of his business. You're not in it just to make money for yourself. You're in it to build an empire like he is. Another interest that he gets involved in the process of vertical integration here are the blast furnaces, which create the pig iron. So they build a blast furnace called the Lucy furnace, named after Lucy Carnegie, Tom's wife. This was apparently a thing they would name. If you're from Pittsburgh, you probably know a lot of female furnaces. The Eliza furnace is another one.
Yeah.
I don't think Eliza furnace was owned by Carnegie. I think that was J&L.
That was J&L, yeah.
But they named them after women because blast furnaces were, as the name suggests,
Temperamental, right?
Temperamental.
Yeah.
And if you named it after a woman, it would have womanly attributes and be calm.
That was
Didn't want it exploding,
Yeah.
so you named it after a woman. So the Lucy furnaces opened on 51st Street in Lawrenceville, what is now Lawrenceville. Then another nearby furnace opens called the Isabella furnace. And a little heated rivalry, you could say, starts between these two furnaces. Again, owned in part by Carnegie, right? Similar interests here. These are not necessarily rival enterprises, and they're both supplying pig iron to Carnegie's steel company. But
there's a bit of a rivalry.
there's a bit of a rivalry, and the amount of pig iron that these two furnaces are able to produce just skyrockets in the course of a couple of years. And you got to imagine that this was difficult for people living in Lawrenceville at the time.
I would think so.
While these furnaces are cranking out more and more pig iron, what that means is they're also buying more and more coke, which means that whoever it is out there that's making the coke is doing a really good job at meeting demand. We'll get to that guy in a minute.
Sure.
So he's got the furnaces, he's got the Freedom Iron Mills, he's got the Union Iron Mills, he's got the Edgar Thomson Works. Carnegie is doing...
He's got like half a dozen different facilities at this point, I mean, or more.
Carnegie is doing pretty well for himself. And it's
Yeah.
at this point, I would like to read a letter that he wrote to himself. We're still talking like 1872, getting into the mid-1870s. Carnegie's empire of business is growing.
This is kind of the start of the Gilded Age, right? This is when industry really starts to become a whole different animal.
Several years before that, in 1868, after tabulating all of his finances and figuring out what he owns and getting everything straight, he writes a letter to himself. 33, he is 33 years old, 33 and an income of $50,000 per annum. By this time, 2 years, I can so arrange all my business as to secure at least $50,000 per annum. Beyond this, never earn. Make no effort to increase fortune, but spend the surplus each year for benevolent,
He spell it wrong?
he spelled a little wrong, purposes. Cast aside business forever except for others. So he does not do that. 1868, he's like, I'm making so much money, I gotta retire soon. 5 years later, he is making so much more money and he's not even close to retiring.
So he's basically saying, if I get to a point where I'm making more than $50,000 a year, I should just retire.
That's too much
Give
money.
every extra penny to benevolent causes. Yeah.
So yeah, he would not end up doing that. He would end up making about $1 billion unadjusted. Eventually. We're not even close to there yet.
$1 billion 1800s dollars.
Yeah.
Not even today.
Yeah. So, okay. Back in time. We're back in the mid 1870s. We were talking about what made Andrew Carnegie such a good businessman, right?
Yeah, what set him apart from the rest?
He denied salaries to his partners, typically. He did not give them a lot of dividends, which often made people upset. So you could probably understand why Andrew Kloman decided at some point, man, I really want to gamble on my own business, because this Carnegie guy, we're making all this money. I mean, we're just destroying Lawrenceville. Like, there's so many cases of asthma, I'm sure. We're just ruining the entire region.
We're
with
turning
our
Pennsylvania
pollution.
black.
Yeah.
Just covering it with soot.
And I'm not even that rich.
Yeah.
So Kloman, not the brightest business guy. Great engineer, not the best business guy. He thinks a vague post in a newspaper is legally binding. He decides he's going to get involved into some businesses. And so, because he's an iron guy, he knows quite well that all that Upper Peninsula of Michigan ore is super good. So he gets
low
involved.
phosphorus, can't have any of that in your blast furnaces.
So he invests in these two businesses, the Cascade Iron Company and the Escanaba Company. He doesn't really know what he's doing. These are not limited liability companies, which means that if you invest a certain amount and the business fails, you're on the hook for your investment. You are liable to have all that repossessed by your partners to pay off your debt. The businesses both go bust. Kloman is on the hook. Carnegie finds out. He's pissed off. He cuts Kloman out of the business entirely. More accurately, he buys Kloman's shares at face value so that Kloman has to deal with his debt on his own, and it's not going to be infringing on the Carnegie business.
And if I'm right, his biggest problem with that wasn't even that Kloman had made a failed investment, but more so that he had hid it from Carnegie.
Yes.
Yeah.
His own ambitions, running contrary to the welfare of the company, destroyed him. This is Kloman we're talking about. He was the first partner to leave because he sought quick wealth outside of the purview of the organization, but he was not the last. Private speculation was the forbidden fruit denied to all who would dine at the Carnegie table. So, yeah, Kloman's out. After more than 10 years, after Kloman first said, don't let that Carnegie guy anywhere near my business, then Carnegie becomes everything to his business, and then Carnegie cuts him out of his own business. He's pretty angry.
Yeah. I would understand how you could have some hard feelings about that.
Now, a fun fact about how the steel industry works is that there's all these different processes that have to perfectly match each other. You got to make a certain amount of pig iron, then you got to make a certain amount of steel ingots, and then a certain amount of finished steel product.
It's all like refining and reshaping, just so many steps along the way.
And they all have to be in balance with each other.
Right.
And if there ever is a time where, for instance, you can't make rails as fast as you can make steel ingots, you're going to have a whole surplus of steel ingots lying around. And that's exactly what happens.
So you have to keep like a homeostasis with every aspect of the enterprise, kind of.
So the Edgar Thomson Works are way better at making steel than they are at finishing steel. So they have all these extra steel ingots lying around that they start selling to local businesses to make more like smaller finished steel products, nails, springs, wires, things like that.
Yeah, things that can be made in small workshops and stuff, yeah.
So this whole like cottage industry springs up in Pittsburgh around the finishing of raw steel purchased from the Edgar Thomson Works. But then their finishing mill at the Edgar Thomson Works gets a little bit better, and then boom, their excess supply of steel ingots goes away. So now you have this local industry that is starving for its product. So a group of local merchants form this business called the Pittsburgh Bessemer Steel Company, and they're like, we're going to make our own steel mill, and it's going to make merchants. It's going to be a secured supply of merchant steel for our businesses, and we need a guy to manage this mill. Who out there is out of a job and pissed off at Carnegie and knows how to run a steel mill? Andrew Cloman. So Andrew Cloman steps back into the picture as going to be the mill superintendent for this new mill that they build on a little plot of land on the south side of a bend of the Monongahela River called Homestead. Joseph Frazier Wall must have met Phipps at some point and hated him because he's
Really?
so mean to Phipps.
No
I
way.
can't
He's got
explain-
like a personal slight against him or something?
Henry Phipps, unlike Cloman, seemed to have no other life, no other will than that of the company. Cloman had tried to vault the wall. Phipps huddled against it for security. The most unprepossessing of men, unattractive, totally lacking in charm, and singularly uninteresting as a companion, Phipps seemed to have almost no characteristic that would have appealed to Carnegie. Among his associates in the company, the only emotional response he seemed to evoke other than dislike was pity.
What in the world?
He's so mean
This
for
is
no
so
reason.
ruthless for no reason.
But Phipps actually had some very legitimate skills to offer the business beyond just his level-headed timidity and bookkeeping.
Yeah.
Phipps realizes that there's this waste byproduct of using the blast furnaces called flue cinder. This was considered a waste product, so they would just throw it away. But Phipps he was the only guy in the company who made sure that they kept a trained chemist on the staff. So he gave the chemist this flue cinder, and he said, "Can we use it for anything?" And the chemist said, "Yeah, we actually can use it in making the pig iron."
Really?
Yeah, it actually can be reused. So Phipps very quietly goes around to all the rival steel mills. He's like, "Hey, can I buy your useless garbage at 1 cent a ton?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course, idiot." You short little guy, unprepossessing, unattractive dimwit. Yeah, take my flue cinder. And then they make a ton of money off of that.
I want to take a moment to pause on that because that's, I think, at least the second time in this story that recycling has been such a big part of business and making fortunes, which is very kind of antithetical to how Fortune 500 companies work today. Everything you buy today is so disposable, meant to be thrown away. Back then, people were literally saying, give me all of your waste from your manufacturing process, give me all of your scrap iron, give me this, give me that, and I'm going to find a way to turn it into a product I can sell.
Another big cost-cutting measure that Phipps introduced was taking the steel shavings that would accumulate at the bottom, accumulate on the floor of the finishing mill, and just remelt it and reuse it.
Yeah, because why not? That's just extra metal, yeah.
So Phipps, despite being totally unattractive and unprepossessing, was actually pretty good at
Despite
his
being
job.
a short little dweeb, he knew how to make his business a little more efficient.
At the Edgar Thomson Works, the men worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week.
Wow.
Local pastors were upset that they're making them work on Sunday. And so this is what Captain Jones said when some priest said, "Hey, maybe don't make workers work
Yeah,
on
let's
Sunday."
hear his response.
He told Carnegie how he handled it. He said, "I have notified our bigoted and sanctimonious cusses that in the event of their attempting to interfere with these works, I will retaliate by promptly discharging any workman who belongs to their churches and thereby get rid of the poorest and most worthless portion of our employees. If they don't want to work when I want them, I shall take good care that they don't work when they want to. We bet $1 they will be glad to drop the agitation." Carnegie's getting pretty famous now. He's pretty well known, not just in Pittsburgh business circles, but in the wider world.
Yeah, I mean, he's been dealing with J.S. Morgan. I mean, jeez. I don't deal with any Morgans.
So he would frequently travel to and from Europe, and when he would arrive back at New York, there would be like a little impromptu press conference because everyone would want to talk to Carnegie. Carnegie never needed to hire an advertising agency to build up his public image. Do you know who that reminds me of?
Who's that?
President of the United States. He is his own brand.
Yeah, the brand is the last name and the life that you inject into the role that you play. That's funny.
The History Channel documentary about Carnegie actually does feature a quote from Donald Trump where Donald Trump says something to the effect of, I think of Carnegie in terms of because we both do buildings, and he was really the first guy to do steel.
It's important metal. We both do buildings, and his buildings had steel.
Also, in Carnegie's life, you got Tom Carnegie, and Tom Carnegie is not doing very well. So
Nope.
He has a wife, he has 9 children, and he cannot find a way to find a work-life balance with his brother, more or less. He begins drinking very heavily, then he gets pneumonia in 1886. Tom was not responding to treatment. He seemed to have lost any real desire to live. Carnegie, who had never really understood his younger brother, had found him in the last few years even more withdrawn and inaccessible. The truth was that Tom had been drinking heavily over a period of 5 or 6 years, far in excess of anything that his family, and especially Andrew, knew about. Tom had never been an active supporter of Andrew's grandiose dreams of business expansion. He had been mistrustful of Andrew's reckless gambles, and in the early years he had tried with occasional success to hold his older brother in check. But the gambles he could not stop had paid off, and the business had expanded beyond Andrew's wildest dreams and Tom's worst fears. Tom felt more and more isolated and unnecessary. Perhaps it was for this reason he had sought escape in drinking. Then his mom gets pneumonia. Tom Carnegie dies. A couple weeks later, his mom dies.
Oh, man.
1886 is a pretty bad year for Andrew Carnegie.
Seems
Everything's
like it,
going
yeah.
gangbusters in his business world. His brother dies. I'm not going to say it was Andrew's fault, but it really seems like
Well,
He had
Joseph
some-
Wall seems to imply that it was definitely
Carnegie's fault.
the cause, at least, of work stress, you could say, and interpersonal stress.
Yeah.
No.
So Andrew Carnegie goes into 1887 with a lot of... He's aged. He's aged a lot of years in the last year. So after 1887, him and his wife get married. They honeymoon in England. This basically begins the period of life where Carnegie is 50-50 splitting his time on both sides of the Atlantic. So he is going to become very involved in British politics. He tries to start a newspaper. Doesn't really work. He tries to just become more or less a big political philosopher. He's like, I'm the son of Great Britain. I went to America and I just figured out how everything works.
There's probably a market for that because he grew up, in Scotland, did well for himself in America. So he probably does, at least with some intimacy, understand the best parts and the worst parts of both systems of governance and has some...
It's interesting you said the best parts and the worst parts because this is how Carnegie feels about the worst parts of American society. Well, a somewhat skeptical Scottish reporter in Aberdeen asked him, "But you mean to say in America you have no long-standing abuses to correct as we in Britain have?" Carnegie, with quiet assurance, replied, "No, that is true, and it is a blessing. The system is perfect." So he literally believes that American society has not a single fault.
There's
in
no room.
1886.
There's no room to
For
change
87.
anything about American society in 1887.
Because worked for him.
Yeah,
Why can't
that's
it
true.
work? Why can't it work for him?
Why can't everybody else just own 17 factories?
Hello, viewer. I know we said all throughout the episode that this was all building to Homestead, but we are very tired and the camera ran out of memory. So we will get to that in a later installation, and then we will talk about the remaining decades of Andrew Carnegie's life. Stay tuned. Don't let the media tell you what to think.